In this video, we're going to be talking about how to communicate. And to start off, undertaking Operation Magician, I want to just say that there are many ways to approach communication, from the theory of the receptor, the emissary, the message, the means, all the way to, I think, some of the best theories out there were put forth by Tony Robbins, and in his book Unlimited Power, where he talks about how you have to know you have to know the way people talk, and this is done by asking key questions that will open up the way in which people express themselves, right? Like, for example, a lot of people will talk about something in relation to the people that attended the event or were at the spot. Some people will talk about a place in reference to the food that was served at the wedding, right? Some people will have a structural way of talking, sequential. Some people will explain things more in a chaotic way. Some people will talk about from an internal loci of control, which is basically how they were feeling during the situation. Some people will talk from an external point of view, which is basically how they viewed everything, how everything was happening at a given moment. Now, some people will speak emotionally, some people will speak rationally, some people will speak about the necessities or the possibilities. Now, all these means of speaking, basically, because this is a fundamental thing that I've seen Andrew Bustamante talk about, as well as Joe Navarro. They talk about mirroring. So mirroring is the effect of copying someone else's body language, tone, words, way of speaking, so they can feel comfortable, right? So it's like establishing the rapport. And you establish the rapport, first of all, very basic guideline is connecting to someone human to human, right? And you may have to be the one to initiate this, to take the first step. So the way in which you do this is you tell the person something about yourself, right? You can say something like, oh, hello, my name is, I'm a teacher, I'm an uncle, and Joe Navarro talks about assessing yourself and the other person. So listen, the first step of communication is ironically listen, right? You have to listen, you have to gather information, assess the other person, assess yourself, how are you feeling in front of this person, right? And then look for ways in which you can effectively communicate or contact that person, right? Unite with that person, establish some form of empathy with that person. So the easiest way to do this, of course, is through sharing facts about yourself, about your personal life, right? So once you do that, and not only sharing just any type of facts about yourself, but sharing relevant facts, right? So if this person tells you that, I don't know, they work at a university and you do too, you can share that information to mirror psychologically that person, right? Now, mirroring can also can also be done physically, like if the person has their arms crossed, you cross your arms. If the person is standing like this or is sitting like this, you mirror that person, right? And many times we can say, well, that's just uncomfortable, but I guess on a psychological level, it works because it will get the person to open up, right? And that's what we want. We want the person to when we're communicating with someone, we want the communication to be open, right? So ideas can flow, so transformation and changes from the magician archetype can come about, right? And I would say it's reciprocal. It goes that way and it comes back, because the magician is trying to transform and change reality, bend through illusion and tricks, but he also wants to be transformed. He also wants to learn, right? He's open to that experience because, like I said last video, it's like the wise man who has knowledge, but in this case, the magician is applying that knowledge. So of course, he's going to want more knowledge to apply, which is really something special, right? When you connect with someone in that sense, and you're able to have that feedback loop of going back and forth. So yeah, like in Andrew Bustamante's interview, he does this with his interviewer, right? Like he says, the interviewer talks about being a father, and he says he wants to be a father, or he is a father, right? This is also from Joe Navarro's YouTube video called Former FBI Agent Explains How to Negotiate from Wired. And he talks about the importance of negotiating prep, which is thinking about the different scenarios beforehand. So even in the sense of communication, and transforming reality, you have to plan how a conversation may go. You have to plan the different ways in which that conversation will go. And for this, I've recommended in some of my other videos doing a type of role playing activity with someone that you trust, or someone that you can do this with, right? Like a friend, a family member. So if you have a really important conversation coming up where you need to influence the other side, you can practice that type of conversation with someone, with a friend, with a family member, right? Like, let's say you have to negotiate a salary, right? That's typically the example that they give. How would that come about, right? What would be the language that's going to be used, the questions that are going to be asked, the answers that are going to be used there, right? So preparing for this, like I was mentioning in video one, don't wing it. Don't just I think you can wing it when you have had a lot of experience in that terrain. But if you're just starting to be a magician, don't go in a situation without being prepared, right? With at least thinking beforehand how it might go, how it may play out, and what you're going to be able to do. Because the best type of thing you can do is be prepared for anything, right? Anything that's going to be thrown at you. So Andrew Bustamante talks about this in the video called CIA Spy Leave the USA Before 2030, Why You Shouldn't Trust Your Gut, Andrew Bustamante. And he talks about 4 motivators. He calls them RICE motivators, because he says it's reward, ideology, coercion, and ego. He explains this, and he also explains that manipulation and motivation are 2 sides of the same coin, right? So and he talks about utilitarian, basically knowing when to use one or the other. So he talks about how you can motivate people, right? And this is very important, because sometimes we say, well, and remember, all these ideas are the same: indoctrinate, manipulate, re-educate, discipline, instruct, convince, brainwash, persuade, motivate. They're all the same thing, but obviously if they have different means, they're going to be applied to different scenarios, right? So let's say you do have good means and you motivate someone, right? But maybe they don't want to be motivated, or it's harder to motivate them. So in that case, you may have to manipulate them. Now, I'm going to talk about this in the next video, how that may come back to bite you in the butt later on. But let's just stay on topic for now. Now, he presents these motivators as a way of communication with the other person. So he says, most people are going to do things for reward, for ideology, for coercion, or for ego, right? And so this goes back a little bit to what I was mentioning about how he established rapport with his interviewer when he talks about fatherhood, because that's an ideological motivator for both of them, right? And he actually, in the interview, he actually ranks them from the strongest to the weakest. Now, this is very important, because this is going to tie into the next video, where he basically says, well, first let's define them. Reward is physically, mostly, right? And it's something that you want. So a reward is something that's going to motivate you to do something, right? And he says it could be many things. It could be from money to possessions to whatever physical thing, or even people, that's going to motivate you, right? That's your reward. Your ideology is what you believe in, right? and you speak through that to them, right? And coercion is basically using, I would even say, physical force, guilt, shame, blackmail. So you lean on the negative side of motivation, which he says is manipulation, and then ego, which is the last one in this rank. Well, in this from these four, ego is how they view themselves, right? So he says it's very important because ego is tied to ideology. Because if what you believe in makes you feel good about yourself, that's like your ego, your self-esteem, right? Okay, so this is where we get into the rank from the strongest to the weakest. The strongest is obviously going to be ideology. So he says you can get people to do many things based on their ideology, right? Like I was speaking about this in the last video. The magician archetype is using branding in marketing and propaganda for products and services that are being sold, right? That are being marketed to the public. And that's because they tap into your ideology, right? Like fatherhood. Do you want to be a good father? Well, buy this product, right? Consider hiring this service, right? Magic will happen. Your life will be transformed because it's tapping into your ideology, and it's also tapping into your ego, right? Like if I do it, I'll feel good about myself. I'll feel like a good father, right? He explains this, but of course this can be applied to many, many things. So ideology is the first strongest one. The second one is ego, because they're kind of related. The third one is reward, which we know it's instrumental motivation, it's external motivation. So people will do what you want them to do for as long as you keep providing that reward. But the moment that you don't provide that reward, like you take away the money, then they'll stop doing it because they're not motivated internally, right? And the fourth one is coercion, because he says if you make someone do something, if you force someone to do something through blackmail, through force, whatever negative means, that person is not going to trust you again. And that's like a one-time deal. Like you can only get them to do that thing once. So it doesn't work because it's like karma. It's going to come back and bite you in the butt. That person will never again trust you, do something for you, will feel manipulated, will feel bad. May even want to get revenge. So that's a bad idea to use coercion, which is what we would probably say is the most commonly known thing, maybe from magicians or just like motivator, manipulator people. But I think that's because everybody always tends to look at the negative things more than the positive things, right? Like if you're motivating someone based on their ideology to be a good father for something that actually works, right, or something that is actually beneficial. Of course, we don't know all the ramifications of that towards the future or towards the long term, right? Like, is this medicine that is very highly promoted, very good for you, very beneficial, down the road is going to cause something negative, like a negative side effect, right? That's hard to predict. But I mean, if you do it with good intention and it backfires, you can't really say, you weren't acting on good faith. I think as long as you act on good faith, it's impossible to know everything towards the future, right? But okay, so it's interesting because he connects with his interviewer, Andrew Bustamante, through fatherhood, right? And he gives it as an example, right? Like he says, the interviewer is like, how do I know what people how people think, what drives them, right? What's their ideology? What's their motivation? And he says, well, you can ask them, but a lot of people just reveal it to you, right? Like the interviewer did, with just naturally through their conversation, where he talked about maybe having a kid in the future, being a good father. And that's where the listening part comes in. So if you're listening and people give you that information, then you can use that information to talk to them through ideology, right? Now, he also mentioned something very interesting, because I've been looking at narration a lot. I'm going to start making narrative stories where I'm going to put in my ideas, but because of the power of a story, right? A story is very powerful. Like just look at Christianity and the story of Christ, right? The passion of Christ. So stories are very big. They're very important. And but he says something about stories where he basically says stories aren't that great unless they have one key ingredient, which is messaging, right? And I was like, okay, that's kind of hard to understand. Like, what is messaging? So basically, messaging is tied to ideology. So it's the way in which you're talking to someone about what they believe in through a story, right? So now you're layering it, right, through a story, and the message is in there, the ideology is in there, right? And this, we could say, it's kind of how when people give their testament about something. So they say, this happened to me, this changed my life because I used to be this person and now I'm transformed and I'm this person, right? So the messaging is in there, and he explains how this was very interesting, how a story is logical, it's sequential, right? There's a beginning, there's an end, which could be entertaining and could connect with people. But if you add in that messaging element, the messaging part is emotional, and that's what's going to make people, that's what's going to make the message resonate with people, right? So he says that you could start off with like a simple question, just like a brand would do, right? Like a commercial would do. Like, I'm going to use the father example because that's the one he uses. Are you the type of father that is not there for their child, right? So it pulls on your heartstrings. It's ideological, it's emotional, and then if you add a story in there, then it will make that message like be remembered, right? Like logically and also emotionally. So yeah, the first thing, just kind of like to recap, is mirroring, right? We have to be able to mirror that person, connect through their ideology or through their ego, right? Look at the words they're using, the ideas that they're handling, and maybe through those ideas, the thing here is to be able to, like I mentioned in a video, excuse me, to be able to make them change their own perspective, right? You don't want them to view your perspective. You want them to be able to change their own perspective, right? And more importantly, to help them think that it was their idea, right? And you do this through like the questions. So it's kind of like therapeutic also. Just two more things I want to add here. Silence and the power of silence. So Joe Navarro mentions this, how at times you can, just, well, this is kind of related to negotiation, but how silence will help you at times, right? Like if you're in a negotiation and you just stay quiet and you kind of like lean into that silence, and the other party kind of feels uncomfortable, and they may just be like, okay, well, yeah, I guess I can take it down to I guess I can give you like a million less, or like he uses this example where they're negotiating like a multi-million house or something like that. So he says, okay, I'll take a million off or something like that, right? So using silence and I guess to a certain extent awkwardness and uncomfortable means to a certain extent, as well as time, right? So he says, Joe Navarro says, whoever controls time controls the moment. So just be aware when you're talking to people, right? Like he says, when are people more resistant towards you, and when are people less resistant towards you, and to what ends, right? Like if you want to ask someone for a favor or get someone to do something, the moment to do that would be in the morning, right? Because people have more energy, people are naturally like happier in the morning. They're like, yeah, like earlier in the morning, like what, like 9, 10, 11 a.m., right? After breakfast, before lunch, like people are more prone to maybe be like, yeah, this happens in courts where they say the judges in the morning are statistically proven to be more lenient than in the afternoon. In the afternoon, it's harder to get people to do things. They're going to be more resistant because they're going to be tired. They're going to be whatever happened in the day, stressed, angry, hungry. They're going to have the problems of the day on them. But yeah, you could say like, well, if you like, for instance, if you want to get someone to do something in the afternoon and you know that it's hard, you could also tell them like, can you do this for me? Expect that backlash, right? Like, leave me alone, like I'm tired, or just for them to react negatively, right? Like in their tone or in their mood. Use silence right? To make them feel bad and then get them to do it. But again, I mean, it depends on the resistance. Like, do you want them to say no? Do you want them to say yes? You know, in the morning, they're going to be more prone to do things, but also more aware, you know. So maybe if you're trying to trick someone, it may be useful to do it in the afternoon because they're more distracted, they're less concentrated, right? Yeah, they're less aware of things than in the morning. In the morning, they're more aware, obviously, but they're also in a good mood. So pros and cons, right? Just gotta analyze the situation. That's where planning comes in, right? And the last thing that I wanted to talk about is this thing where they say sometimes when someone's upset, the best thing to do is just let them vent, right? So this means just letting them talk. You know, if they're angry, if they're whatever, just letting them like vent, right? And getting all of that out, because they say that when a person does this, not only can you use guilt, right, which could be like a manipulation tactic, but you can also and what I mean by using guilt is that they'll feel guilty after they said whatever they said, right? In a trance of fury. But you could also, if you let them vent, afterwards they're gonna feel tired, right? And again, they're gonna be less resistant to just accept whatever you offer them, right? So Joe Navarro says this happens maybe with people at airlines or airports where they're really angry about something, they vent, and he just says, he I guess he coaches some airport people, and he tells them like just let them vent, and after they vent for however many minutes they vent, after that just offer them what you're going to offer them, and they'll most likely accept it because, you know, they're already tired from venting. That's kind of the bad thing about anger, right? And explosive emotions. The explosion is only for a moment, right? And after that, you got to deal with all of the destruction, with all of the crap, with guilt, right? That's from Alejandro Jodorowsky. He says that, he's like, well, getting angry is not that good. It's not that good of a thing. And you're like, well, yeah, everybody knows getting angry is not good, but why is it not good? And he says, because you're going to feel guilty afterwards. And it's like, oh yeah, like think about that consequence, right? Okay, so this was the video on how to communicate. Next video is going to be about knowing that with time, everything comes to light. So secrets are revealed, right? So being careful with that too. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.